Hey, how you doing? It's Lee here. I just finished eating some lunch, had a beef pastry and some cheese, and I'm feeling kind of full, so I'm ready to read the ninth chapter of my novel, Compulsion. As they continued walking, John felt suddenly that Janet was insincere. He figured he was a part of a devious plan and her role was to keep him from whatever was really going on. When they turned onto Valencia Street, where she and Walter lived, John thought about Walter's party. Little details were coming back to his memory. What seemed trivial at that time was now more like pieces to a disturbing puzzle. Walter had talked with Zachary about someone, but no names were mentioned. Walter said his father was ashamed, from what I was told. The poor fellow had written something with hopes of getting through to the guy, but the son wouldn't listen. Zachary nodded. I understand. When a son feels he has fallen in love with another man, he cares not one bit to hear what his father has to say about women. He told me he was hoping to be a part of something so he could use his father's money. It's supposed to be a strange scam with your friend, the lawyer. Walter said, My friend doesn't know that I know the guy. I was hoping he'd show up tonight so I could surprise him, but I didn't know about any scam. I think I'll ask my lawyer friend about it. There's rumors of hanky-panky, and I believe it. There's at least 2 other people involved, and from what I hear, they all get together, but they aren't there for the purpose of talking. That's even more interesting because I never sensed anything about either my friend or the other guy being that way. Probably your lawyer friend isn't involved like that. I think it's a strange kind of extra perk for the other 3, as if they're celebrating their future lives as millionaires. Well, the fellow in question could have had the decency to be honest about that with me. John realized now that they were talking about his uncle. He was not exactly sure who Walter's lawyer friend was, but he would not be surprised if the person was Janet. To her, he asked, Did Walter tell you something about my uncle? Janet shrugged. He said Harold had talked with him when Walter was a patient. From what I understand, your uncle was a lot cleaner back when he was working. I'm not referring to that. Did they talk about a scam? Wait a minute. The lawsuit between Oliver and Spencer. Is my uncle involved? I think they are very happy to spend time together. He was annoyed. She was avoiding the points mentioned. He stopped, and so did she. He asked, Are you keeping me away from something? She answered, I'm keeping you from trouble. He tried pulling his hand loose. What sort of trouble would I be in? She squeezed tighter and frowned. Your mother is a lot of trouble, and so is your uncle and his family. You need a change in your life, and I need a change in mine. Please stop trying to let go. I think there's more about everything than what you're telling me, and we're going to Walter's place for some reason I have yet to know. We're going to his house so I can discover more clues about this. You're being evasive. I'm afraid that Walter might do harm to me, and you've been told to drag me to him. The way you're holding on is like I'm being kidnapped. She raised her voice. You are not being kidnapped. You can go home whenever you like. I'll just be going with you. I'm providing a situation for you to feel a realm of love. It's what I call Himalayan unity. John stopped trying to let go. He had no clue what she meant about Himalayan unity, but her tone seemed sincere. Are you telling me you really don't know everything about the lawsuit? Were you or were you not the one Walter asked about the scam? Janet sighed. Okay, I will let you in on something. The person handling the situation is my father, Stephen Baker. My father is a friend of Walter's. Walter knows your uncle. You already understand that. It is coincidence that my father handled your grandfather's inheritance. This is starting to make sense, but it's also just as unclear as it was before. What does your father have to do with you gripping me? I had a dream about you sometime after I saw you at the party. When you had ran away from me that night, I was going to shake your hand and never let go. It probably had something to do with you not wanting to hug me in the kitchen." John nodded. "Why exactly did you want to hug me? Did Zachary tell you something?" "Zachary had told me you were getting a glass of milk for somebody, but that's not why I wanted to hug you." "What's the reason then?" "Do you remember a time when you visited your grandfather and I was there?" Suddenly, another memory came back to him. Grandfather Sherman never visited his children or grandchildren, supposedly because they indulged in drugs, but he requested John to visit him a few times when Sherman was an old man. During one visit, there was a woman tidying up some papers for several minutes before she went inside a guest bedroom. John assumed she was a maid or a nurse, but did not inquire about that. He asked, "Why did you want to see me, grandfather?" Sherman said, "Please excuse an old man who walks slow and has little time left on this earth. I do my best to stay in good physical health, but the reality of time still moves on. I cannot say I regret distancing myself from your mother, Rose, and my son, Harold. However, I do regret not spending more time with you. Rose made it clear that I was not to pass information along to her about nutrition. My wife, your grandmother Goethe, had been a caterer who owned her own restaurant for a while. She made a lot of money at it, but that was something in which I did not know until later. She had not indulged us with any of the food she cooked for the public. At the restaurant, she would make linguine with clams, spaghetti and meatballs, coq au vin, lamb shanks, and cabbage sautéed with garlic, onions, and wine sauce. At home, she served canned meats and raviolis. Once in a while she might make stewed beef cutlets and mashed potatoes, but she loaded the food with way too much salt and pepper and used margarine instead of butter, so everything had the thick aftertaste of grease on it. Our neighbors told us of how wonderful the food was, where she cooked for customers. Rose felt like her mother abused her by giving her meals that were less tasty and prepared with less love. That is why Rose blamed both of us for ruining her taste buds. I had no time to cook. I worked long hours fixing railroad cars. I was not even a driver. I was a mechanic. I made enough to support the family, but the hours were rather long. Harold did not mind the food Goethe made, and in fact gained weight because of what she served. Rose did also, but then, when she left home, she got an idea of not using spices or seasonings on anything. She compensated by eating way more than any portions her mother fed her. She got even angrier at us for the immense weight gain, and preferred I not visit her after Goethe died. John said, "I think it is strange that my mother would eat larger portions of food and think that was healthy." "It has to do not so much with nutrition than the culture. We are of Eastern European descent. We were born in the United States, but we were products of our genetic lines. Some people have a psychological comfort from what can be called the full belly factor. Goethe did not believe in it, or she did not around the family, and she fed us enough to feel we were served a small but sufficient sized meal. There were things about my wife's childhood she never told me, except she alluded to rough times. Her philosophy was to never gain too much. She told us that it was best for one to be thankful for having a small amount. She said that the people who became rich were most prone to lose sense of how to exist on little. According to her, rich people would be the most helpless during any time the economy collapsed, because they relied on their money to get out of problems instead of using potential survival knowledge. When I discovered later, after she died, that she saved a lot of money, enough for us to be called millionaires, I was shocked, but I now see why she had the money. She wanted a security nest in case the day came a major catastrophe hit. She did not believe in living a wealthy lifestyle, but she did not believe in being unprepared. Rose, however, must have inherited the Eastern European psychology of the full belly factor, because a part of her idea about leaving home had to do with feeling she could eat however much she wanted. That was her sense of security. Harold just liked food, as well as other things which I can talk about in a minute. I was more like Rose in wanting a full belly, but later in my life, after I found the money, I saw how huge a few of my neighbors became, and they complained about stomach problems, so I was glad I did not become like them. John asked, "What were some of the other things Harold liked?" Sherman shook his head. "I've changed my mind about telling you. I think he is not aware of his desires yet. Let us just say he has a very certain preference when it comes to his relationships with people." John thought for a moment he knew what his grandfather meant, but then decided there was a possibility Sherman was referring to something else entirely. "Do you hate Harold?" "I wish for him what he does not wish for himself. I wrote a letter to him, deciding how I now feel about life. Maybe you could read it at some point. I believe it would be good for you to do so. Let me change the subject. What is your opinion of the woman who you saw going in the guest room?" "I only saw her for a minute." Sherman nodded. "I suggest to go to the restroom, and as you pass her by, you look at her and form an opinion." John walked towards the restroom. As he passed by where the woman was located, he looked at her and noticed she had on a long-sleeved black and red t-shirt with the word "sports" on it. The t-shirt was tucked into leggings that had a belt on them. He felt an automatic sense of arousal. She turned towards him with her arms extended for a hug. John did not know how to react. He walked back into the living room where his grandfather was sitting. John said, "I like her very much, but I have to go now." He exited Sherman's house. "Now," Janet asked, "will you answer my question?" John said, "I was thinking of when I visited my grandfather. Was that you in that room?" "Oh my, I apologize for my behavior. You wanted to hug me back then. I ran off like I did when I saw you at Walter's party." She nodded. "Now you understand what I really mean when I say I need to find clues. I need to know more about you." "You can ask me anything. You don't have to keep holding on. I won't run away." She laughed. "From my experience, you will run away. I cannot take that chance, especially after I read something your grandfather gave me." They approached Janet's house. She opened the door and they walked inside. John was amazed. "This is just like the dream I had." "What dream?" "I had a dream I lived here, and so did you, and you shook my hand and wouldn't let go." "When did you have this dream? Was it before or after Walter's party?" "Before." She nodded. "Okay, I also had a dream, but it took place after." John was nervous. "Were you wearing a thick sweater tucked into belted jeans with the sleeves pushed up?" "Yes." John shook his head. "This is too weird." "No, it's beautiful, and it confirms that what I'm doing is the right thing. You need to read something." They walked to a bookshelf in her living room. She grabbed a pamphlet and handed it to him. "Your grandfather wrote that. Originally it was for Harold, but he revised it so it was for anybody. He told me he thought that I was the type of woman you liked, and I ought to do what I could to get to know you." John looked at the pamphlet. It was entitled, "My Understanding of Happiness," by Sherman Goldman. The first paragraph stated, "I, Sherman Goldman, am a man whom life has given many years, some of which I would change if I could, but some I find myself loving. The years I love are my recent years. For the information to the reader, I am a widower with 2 children and 2 grandchildren. One child is a daughter who has her own psychology, which indicates, at least in part, I should keep my distance. I am fine with that because I am disturbed by her appearance. The other child, a son, is confused about what he wants from life. I saw it in his actions when he would purposefully bang his head against a door and say he was not worthy of existence. I wrote a first draft of this to him, but when he saw it, he gave it back to me and made no comment. I resolved that the advice was sound, so I have made an updated version of the letter, and it has become what you are holding now. If you are reading this, you probably know me personally. Janet pointed at another paragraph. This is the part that's important. John nodded. The paragraph stated, "My wife used to be a caterer. However, the thing she made for the family was not of the same quality. Recently, a friend of mine, a fellow co-worker who is retired like myself, brought me to a restaurant called Himalayan Journey. The food was remarkable. I researched the Himalayas and saw there was more than one country comprising the mountain range. I looked into the foods and found things such as emadachi, made with chili and cheese, ngape, which is fermented seafood, mohinga, a rice noodle and fish soup, dal blat, consisting of steamed rice and lentils, momo, a dumpling that is traditionally filled with yak meat and eaten with various sauces, and lassi, a drink of yogurt, water, spices, and sometimes fruit. The cuisines of China and India, which are somewhat more familiar to me, are also a part of what can be called Himalayan cuisine. I am simplifying this. There is more to the Himalayas than the little bit of the cuisine I explained, but I found that when I ate certain foods from those countries, my state of mind became happier. I felt reborn. I realized that a person will be in harmony with life when that person becomes more connected to diversity. I call it Himalayan unity because of the food I ate, which made me feel great, not only physically but mentally. I believe togetherness, not separation, is the answer. Janet asked, "Did you get to the part about togetherness being the answer?" John said, "I did." She took the pamphlet from him and put it back on her shelf. Sherman thought that the reason Harold was confused about his sexuality and felt depressed was because he grew up eating foods that were not prepared for health. Harold ate food that represented economy and low budgeting. That's what Sherman thought. I'm not saying I agreed with his assessment of Harold, but I think the pamphlet had some good points. I grew up with a love of philosophy and the arts. I let my father talk me into becoming a lawyer, which is something I would not have done on my own, but I learned something when I studied law. It's a bit complicated what I learned, and I won't talk about all of it now, but it's helped me realize that something can be justified if it is done with conviction. I put everything I learned into one big realization, and that was how important it is to have a counterpart. You're my counterpart. John realized he ought to stick with his original plan of escaping when Janet fell asleep. Eventually she would get tired after focusing all her energy on him. He said, "I never would have thought of it the way you put it." She said, "It seems like the difficult part is over. All I have to do now is convince everyone involved in Spencer's and Oliver's scam that they can do whatever they want and I don't want to be a part of it." "How are you involved?" "It wasn't like I was really involved. I was more like a backup person in case something suddenly happened and I had to verify whatever needed verifying. I was like a personal reference." "You're not going to do that now?" "I'm not interested in stopping them. I think it's bizarre, but it's their business. I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I just want to be with you." He nodded. "Is that going to be your job? To be with me?" She sighed. "I'm serious. We're going to find everyone and I'm going to tell them they can do whatever they want and I'm going to make arrangements for us to live together in an environment where we can stay joined." "Where do you plan for us to live?" "Oregon could be a good choice. Some of my old high school friends are there." "Sounds interesting." He did not want to ask her how she would handle the situation of changing her clothes or taking a shower. The day was getting later, and he figured she would finally doze off. She smiled. "Where are we going to spend the night, my place or yours?" He shrugged. "Your place sounds good." He was more confident now that she would snooze, and then he could pull his hand out of hers. We have to go to Walter's right now. I agree. They walked out of her house.